Canada has gone full Black Mirror. Now, I have covered this previously, but it seems to have come back up into the news, and I thought it would be relevant to remind everybody of what is going on in Canada currently with their MAID program. Are you aware of the MAID program in Canada? MAID is a abbreviation of Medical Assistance in Dying. It is a voluntary euthanasia program that they have going, and it is open to abuse, is being abused, and come March of next year is about to be open to far, far more abuse than even we've seen so far. Before I go further, we have a very interesting interview that Josh conducted the other day with a man called James Esses, who was a teacher who was cancelled for his opposition of transitioning kids. I have not watched this interview, but it seems very, very interesting, and there is a lot of bad stuff going on in current culture in the West regarding children, both in terms of trying to transition them, in trying to make it easier and easier to abort them when they're closer and closer to term, and all these sorts of things, and that's what I'll be covering today. So go check that out if you want to check out a very interesting interview. So I mentioned this article earlier on this year talking about, from The Spectator, why is Canada euthanizing the poor? They chose to frame this from the perspective of it seems to be affecting mainly people from very low incomes because it's quite difficult for them to be able to afford healthcare costs, and a lot of people say, what do you mean? Canada's got a socialised healthcare system. It doesn't cost the people any... That's not how it works. It's not how it actually works, sad to say. But I'll get into this because this article does have some very good information. It's good to remember. So it was back in 2015 when the Supreme Court of Canada had decided to reverse 22 years of jurisprudence by striking down the country's ban on assisted suicide as unconstitutional. So they decided it isn't unconstitutional, we can legalise it. The very next year, their parliament enacted legislation allowing euthanasia, but only for those who suffer from a terminal illness whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable. So you can see how it could be abused, but in its initial phase, there were a certain level of safeguards available so that people weren't forced into it, or so that people weren't allowed this option when it wasn't reasonable for them to have government assistance taking your own life. Yeah. My general thing is, if you're going to kill yourself, if you're really that hard set on it, you don't need the government's help.
Hold your breath.
Really long. Yeah, there you go. Not that I'm encouraging people to do anything like that anyway, just mainly the government beginning to help people kill themselves is a very slippery slope, as this article talks about.
It creates a sort of environment where people might feel coerced or might feel...
Oh, we'll get into examples of that, trust me. So they introduced, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, Bill C-7, a sweeping euthanasia law which repealed the reasonably foreseeable requirement and the requirement that the condition should be terminal. So this opened it up for abuse where people who were just in physical pain or suffering from physical diseases and other such things that they could potentially live with were able to just get euthanized instead. For instance, an abuse that they list in here, a man with a neurodegenerative disease testified to Parliament that nurses and a medical ethicist, and ethicists, I've found in doing this job and looking up the sorts of things that ethicists often talk about, are the least ethical people in the entire world because their entire job is basically them finding ways to formulate excuses for bad behaviour. So don't trust ethicists. So they, at a hospital, tried to coerce him into killing himself by threatening to bankrupt him with extra costs, or by kicking him out of the hospital and by withholding water from him for 20 days. So this is just abject abuse. This is very obvious abuse. Not just bankrupting, not just kicking him out of the hospital like SpongeBob SquarePants or something. Literally just not giving him any water, starving him out, dehydrating the man so he's not in his right mind, and going, you sure you don't want to kill yourself? You sure you don't want to get euthanized? Is appalling. And then even before Bill C-7 entered into force, the country's parliamentary budget officer, because remember, governments only ever do things for altruistic reasons. A government would never take monetary costs into account. It's only evil businesses that do such a thing. But the government's parliamentary budget officer published a report about the cost savings that this would create, whereas the original MAID regime saved only 86.9 million Canadian dollars per year. A net cost reduction, in the sterile words of the report, Bill C7 would create an additional net saving of $62 million per year. So that's almost that's over $100 million saved by the Canadian taxpayer, by the benevolent Canadian government. All you need to do, you get tax cut, I get to kill you. There you go. Fair trade, right? Canada, I looked into it, doesn't even have the death penalty because they banned it back in 1998 for compassionate and humanitarian reasons. So evidently what they decided to do was reinstate it on a voluntary basis. That's what it looks like here. If you're wondering why it expanded past those initial restrictions of terminal illness and when you're about to, basically upcoming to death, as a way to try and give people a more dignified way out, say if you've got a wasting degenerative disease, I found this article talking about a made litigant who said that their disability didn't make her vulnerable to pressure to end her life. Now, this woman is called Nicole Gladue, and she was a 75-year-old Quebecer who uses a wheelchair due to post-polio syndrome.
She needs to wear clothes that are different from her cushions. It's really hard to tell where she ends and the cushion begins.
Now, she's blending in. She's like a chameleon.
Camouflage, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Sneaky
if you can
Canadian.
invade a branch of Laura Ashley, that's the camouflage the SAS give you.
Sneaky French Canadian right there. She still lives independently in a 14th floor condo with a beautiful view and cherishes her autonomy, according to this article.
Probably got a lift.
Including the right to seek medical help to end her suffering when she decides it has become intolerable. She is one of 2 Quebecers who successfully challenged the constitutionality of the federal law's stipulation of medical assistance in dying only being provided to those whose natural death is reasonably foreseeable. As a result of the court ruling in her case, Trudeau's government introduced Bill C7 to expand access. So, you know, what I think has happened here is, given that the government in Canada was already talking about all the costs that they were going to save through this, they found someone who was going to say all the right arguments, they found some people who were going to make the case for them to expand it, and then just did what they were going to do anyway. Obviously, they wanted to expand this because they're talking about how much money it's going to save them by expanding this thing. So they just found a convenient story to put in the newspapers so that everybody would have some kind of sympathetic face to put to this. Because you can say this one woman and the other person both say that they want greater access to it, and they're not worried about being pressured or forced into it, and they don't see any reason why it would happen to anybody else. But the fact of the matter is, reality has come back to bite hard, because now it's going even further. In March of 2023, it's set to expand further and extend eligibility to those with mental illnesses. Because when you think about the sort of person who is in their right mind to know the ramifications of a decision like killing yourself, the mentally ill are who I immediately think of. I think it goes even further than this. I remember a stipulation being reported about where it would be also applying to mature minors, which is even more concerning because a mentally ill, mature minor, with mature, I'm sure being a very vague term on purpose, making the decision to kill themselves, is something that I remember a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, most people in the West were trying to avoid because there was a state of, the massive spate of self-harming. There's an increase in mental illnesses like depression and anxiety among younger people nowadays. So opening this up is ripe for abuse.
And obviously, you know, if you're young, like a child or a teenager, you know, the depression that you feel is often resolved. And
it's transitory. It's because you've got hormones going through your body and you don't understand the changes that you're going through. All of a sudden, you're expected to have a lot more responsibility and independence, whereas before you were entirely reliant on your parents. You go through the rebellious phase. You end up falling out with your parents. All this sort of stuff is massively impactful on teenagers' mental health. So then just opening up the ability for them to just go, you know what? I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm out of here. Especially because I have known people who tried to do that sort of thing when they were a teenager, and it was only ever a cry for help. None of them actually wanted to die. They wanted to have some sympathy and attention brought to whatever suffering that they were going through at the time. Whereas now, if it's going to be administered by the government, if there's one thing governments aren't incompetent at, it's killing people. It's the one thing they are good at consistently.
Taxing and killing.
Yeah, there you go. So all of a sudden that cry for help is going to just turn into you actually dying. Fantastic. So somebody went on Tucker Carlson to talk about this. Someone from Canada went on to Tucker Carlson and talked about this, and he said that right now, before coming in, he researched a group of physicians in Quebec that wanted to kill newborn infants, and he said that this is what's coming next, because I do see this as just another step in the massive in the line of what in the road that we're going down, where human life is just completely devalued. The idea of it having any sanctity or anything special about humanity being completely destroyed, and all of a sudden that's when you're going to start to see people talk about, well, if we're killing depressed teenagers, then my baby didn't come out exactly how I wanted it to. Let's just kill it, try again some other time.
Yeah.
That's what I think this is all leading to.
We've seen them, I don't know if it's in Canada, but certainly in some American states, they tried to bring through legislation that would allow, it doesn't criminalise the neglect of a baby after it's born. So you can basically allow, because obviously a baby requires human assistance to survive. So you
can let it starve to death.
Yeah, it's horrible.
It's
horrible.
Absolutely
and also
awful.
This sort of mature minor, when they use terminology like this, what they're saying is children have the sort of competence to make these decisions about their life, and so they're saying, and it's the same with the transgender stuff. They're saying, children are qualified to make these decisions, and what the inference there is, if the child is competent to make decisions about this, what about giving consent to other stuff?
They're opening up the floodgates, really.
Basically, it's a nonce wedge.
Absolutely, it is, and it's just keeping on going. And I did find this article on Substack from a page on there called Common Sense, which has a great article talking all about this, using an example of somebody's story and also giving a lot of figures in here. So a woman called Margaret Marcilla, they say in this article, called Joshua Tepper, who was a doctor who had planned to kill her son. She had known for a while that her 23-year-old son, Keanu Vafian, Canadian names, I've no idea, was depressed. He was diabetic and lost vision in one eye, didn't have a job or a girlfriend or much of a future. So she and her daughter basically checked out his emails because they were worried about the guy. They hacked in, and they found out that he had applied for MAID and been approved for it as well.
And
his death, this was his death was scheduled for September 22nd. They only found out on September 7th, so that's just over 2 weeks to figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Guy in his early 20s, his life isn't going the way that he wanted it to.
Yeah.
His life, he's not got a girlfriend or anything like that. Well, might as well just kill myself then. And the government's like, we can help with that.
Yeah, but he's got a treatable condition.
Yeah, there are ways to find... there are ways to find ways to improve this man's life. And to get him to turn it around, and so that he's a productive member of society who has meaning and is able to be fulfilled in his life. Obviously, losing his vision in one eye isn't great. I don't know how you're going to be able to solve that, but still, plenty of people. It's not the end of the world.
If he stops masturbating now, you can save the other eye.
Yeah. But it talks a bit about his background. His dad and his mum had gotten divorced when he was still a kid. On his 16th birthday, she'd given him a BMW. When he was 17, he had a bad car accident. He wasn't up to college, and he smoked a ton of weed. So a lot of this is kind of, you can kind of see how this could apply to a lot of people. Bad relationship with the parents, broken family home, mum who's trying her hardest, or dad who's trying his hardest, depending on the circumstances, to maintain a relationship, feeling no prospects, and then also you smoke a load of weed, which is going to make your mental health far worse if you're already in a vulnerable situation. I mean, that stuff can cause schizophrenia if you've got bad enough mental health to start off with. This is a recipe for disaster, and the Canadian government is standing aside going, should we help with any of the other stuff? No, but we can help him kill himself, though.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And they're like, we're going to save the taxpayer money.
I know. And
it's not like Canada's a poor country.
No, it's not. It shouldn't be, at least. But they want to save that money, don't they? Money-grubbing Canadians.
I wish our government wanted to save money this much.
I know, right? But and then they talk about some of the figures regarding MAID since it's been introduced. So in 2017, which is the first full year in which MAID had been administered by provincial governments, 2,838 people had opted for assisted suicide, and this was during the period where it was much more restrictive and had safeguards against it. By 2021, when they'd opened it up, that figure had jumped to 10,064, accounting for more than 3% of all deaths in Canada that year. From what I'm aware, depending on which province you're talking about in Canada, 1 in 6 deaths in those provinces is due to the maid service.
Jesus.
So it's taking down a lot of people. There have been a total of 31,664 maid deaths, and a large majority of those people were 65 to 80 when they died. In 2017, only 34 maid deaths were in the 18 to 45-year-old category. In 2018, that figure rose to at least 49. In 2019, 103, 2020, 118, 2021, 139. So this is very slowly ramping up. But the second you open the floodgates to people with mental illnesses being able to do this sort of thing, bam, it's going to be ridiculous.
Yeah, because some like a third of the population gets treated for depression or mental illness at some point.
Can you imagine them opening? Well, actually, I think there is a more restrictive assisted suicide program in California. And California, everyone goes to therapy. Can you imagine going to your therapist and being like, oh, I'm really depressed, and they've been like, well, we've been here for like 3 months now and you've shown no progression. Well, here you go. Might as well.
Get in the booth.
Yeah, get in the suicide booth. Go on.
Yeah, you got 2 choices. You can either get in that suicide booth or you can transition. We're the government and we're here to help.
And it's very strange because there is a community starting to grow around this whole thing. So the Made Curious, they list here, were lonely and scared. They'd coalesced into a growing online community, sort of like a suicide cult, mostly on Twitter and Facebook. And through the spread of death cafes, there were more than 1,300 death cafes in Canada and 14,000 worldwide. And they give us an example of some of the sorts of people who go through with this. So Les Landry, a 65-year-old, said that he was in the middle of filing out his MAID application. He was from Medicine Hat, Alberta, in the middle of nowhere, several hours southeast of Calgary and a little north of the Montana line. He received $1,238 every month for the government, but he was always short on cash. And he said, in his own words, there's a tipping point where you can't afford to live. MAID is the new social safety net. So that's how it just goes in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a huge fan of the welfare state.
Yeah.
But I would still rather we try, bad as some of the outcomes may be for people, we actually try to help people than just go, all right, kill yourself then.
Yeah, my view on the welfare state is I want to stop it. I don't want to, replace it with bullets.
I know, right? But there's much more to this article, so you can check that out because it's in the description below. If you're on YouTube, go to the website, check out this podcast, and you can find it below and read it because there's some very interesting information in there, and you can learn the rest of the story regarding the mother and her son, what happened there. And there is lots of questions going on. How can Canada safeguard as those who are marginalised as MAID expands? And here's another example of a story of malpractice within Canadian healthcare. A man called Jeff Preston, hospitalised for pneumonia a few years ago. Nurse asked if he wanted to be resuscitated if his heart or breathing stopped. She said to him, because he's got muscular dystrophy, the nurse described in graphic detail the undue suffering he would experience during resuscitation and if he survived. Now, they say here that she wasn't actively forcing anything on him, but it did say the nurse didn't coerce him or tell him what to do, but also didn't provide balanced information about how the care team would address his suffering if he wanted to be resuscitated. And the message was clear. Maybe sometimes it's best to just go. So that's a form of pressure that's being put on people where you're lying by omission to put pressure. And there's other people trying to expand it even further. For instance, this ridiculous website, davidhealy.org, talking about Made in Canada, wanting to open it up to people with enduring sexual dysfunctions. So if you consistently suffer from ED or something, or if you have some discomfort down there, shall we say, this guy just wants you to be able to kill yourself, you know? Sorry, can't get it up. What's the point?
Yeah.
I mean,
geez. I guess the one positive out of this is what I've noticed on Twitter is all the sort of lefties, all the blue hairs that scream and call you a Nazi and all the rest of it. They're all the ones that are constantly depressed. So maybe I'm not saying
you're going with the social Darwinist take.
I don't want to be a eugenicist.
Canadian left takes itself out. Is that what we're saying
this is
here?
The left just committing a massive Harry Carey or whatever.
Well, okay, maybe there is a bright side that you could spin on this. But I also found this, a website called Sanction Suicides, which is a forum where people looking for this can discuss it. And some of the discussions they have here tell you the state of mind that these people are in, and they are not really in the sort of state of mind to be able to be making these decisions. For one person's trying to put forward a petition expanding it even further, saying, have you written in support of this expansion? Somebody said about the expansion going on in March next year, I'm so excited for this, we should have a choice. People won't take unnecessary risks as much or go through unnecessary pain. All in all, it's to end the pain, and some of us have suffered for far too long. I've suffered since I was 8 with anxiety and depression. To be free of pain, how exciting. So once again, we see another example of somebody who physically is in perfect health, who suffers from some mental problems, and I assume they're in perfect health. I mean, they're posting on a forum like this, so I don't know. But mentally, they do have some problems. Yeah, that could be solved through proper treatment, therapeutic sessions, or anything like that.
Or just by not being a pussy.
Yeah.
Have you tried manning up?
I mean, that might not help, but
I think it would help.
It
I'm
probably
offering
would.
my services as a therapist.
Oh, all right. Okay, so if you're interested in that, check out, get in contact with Leo Curse. But somebody's just gone like, well, I can't get any better. They've just decided, so I might as well die.
Yeah.
All right. And then somebody else put, just a reminder that the Conservative Party has vowed to repeal this law if they come into power in Canada. Vote accordingly in the future. This is why I hope the Supreme Court rules it a right for the mentally ill, so they'd be unable to do so. Another thing to point out here is that the Canadian laws currently are saying that this is only for citizens of Canada. This is only for citizens of Canada, so it will prevent suicide tourism, but a lot of these sorts of people are saying that it needs to be expanded, so to just allow Canada to, say, become the suicide capital of the world.
Like people go to Amsterdam to take some mushrooms or whatever, they'll go to Canada to kill themselves after they've developed mental illness from smoking weed in Amsterdam.
Presumably. And there is a bit more, but the only other thing I'll cover in regards to this then is you may be wondering, what about people in the system who aren't huge into the idea of actually, helping people to kill themselves? Well, they've not got it great either. I think it's the next article over, John. Thank you. So this one talks about a woman called Mary Jean Martin, a registered nurse who worked in middle management as a home care coordinator in Ontario, who lost her job because she refused to go along with this. Yeah. She was told that all healthcare workers would now be required to sign and take an oath of allegiance to observe and comply with the laws of Canada, including the new euthanasia and assisted suicide law. Ontario's Liberal government, led by a woman called Kathleen Wynne, voted that doctors and nurses must participate in euthanasia and assisted suicide if a patient requests it. That was Bill 84. Alex Schadenberg, who's a man who's the director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, said that it concerns him when people who oppose killing are filtered out of the medical profession, because this woman lost her job because she refused to sign it, because she said, I started to become a nurse to help people, not to kill people.
The Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah, and this Schadenberg man says the reason is simple. If you're a doctor or a nurse and you say you disagree with euthanasia and will not practice it, then euthanasia advocates interpret this as you judging them, because there's always something because you believe there's something morally wrong with it. They want there to be no moral opposition or anyone personally opposed to the practice. They want euthanasia completely normalised. So this is just terrifying.
Like the gender ideologists at the Tavistock. If anybody questioned it, if anybody was against it, then they were sacked and they were criticised of transphobia.
Exactly. And there are laws like this across some of the states in the US. I don't think there's anything like this coming to the UK soon, but then again, the West is completely incestuous, and what happens across the pond inevitably ends up making its way over here as well. Yep. So we can't let this get to the UK. Canada, please, next time, vote accordingly for people who aren't going to make it so easy for your entire population to kill yourselves.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium hangouts we do, this one on the second birthday anniversary. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.